Today I'm going to break down the top 5 reasons that I see that cause people to choke under pressure. We've all seen it, and some of us unfortunately have had it happen to us. The choke. We define choking in the world of high performance psychology as an athlete or a performer who experiences a dramatic decline in performance, usually in the face of intense psychological pressure. And unfortunately for the athletes involved, the coaches, and especially the fans, there are some memorable chokes that stand out. You have, of course, the one most of us know, the 1986 World Series. Some of you might remember what happened at the 2016 Masters.
Goodness, Frank. How many turns have...
And as a lifelong Minnesota Vikings fan, one moment, even though my team has had a lot of these moments, one moment sticks out above the rest.
McDermott is the snapper, and the kick is no good!
Anyways, all those examples aside, a few weeks ago I sent out a survey polling my community, asking them if they were athletes or if they were parents and coaches, what some of the struggles were that their athletes were dealing with the most right now. 2 things came up the most. The first was confidence, and I've got many resources here on my YouTube channel, as well as my consistent confidence course over at my website, trainwithperk.com. The second was a variety of responses that in one way or another talked about the struggle that the athletes were having dealing with either pressure or, more specifically, the effects of that pressure on their performance. So to provide the members of my community, as well as you watching this, some value and some help with this problem, this is going to be the first video of my Performing Under Pressure series here on my YouTube channel. Now, this video series could probably be a paid course all by itself, but I wanted to go ahead and make the resources available and the training available in this series to you and to anybody else who's been having a hard time with pressure, because in my mind, if I can just help one person not experience something like the clips that we just saw, I'd be able to define this series as a success. So in this first video, I'm going to talk about the top 5 reasons that I see athletes choke the most. Now listen, this isn't going to be all the reasons that athletes choke, but in the last 7 years of me working with my one-on-one individuals, these 5 reasons show up the most. The purpose of talking to you about these 5 reasons is really a couple of things. The first is that if you as a person can understand some of the most common reasons why people choke, it's going to make it far more likely that you're able to catch yourself before you make some of the same mistakes. The second reason is that if you have a problem performing under pressure, or you're concerned that you might choke sometime in the future, odds are that you've been struggling with pressure for one of these 5 reasons. And this video is going to help you not only recognize that, but I'm also going to give you some tools to help you manage that stress and that pressure in those moments. Before we dive into those 5 reasons, let's start off by giving you a gift today for even stopping by the channel. If you're an athlete or a performer, or you're a parent or coach and you have an athlete or a performer, I want to give you a free guide that's really going to help them boost their ability to mentally prepare for their next big moment. If you get over my website, trainwithperk.com/free guide, it's a quick little 10-minute read that's got 3 easy to install steps that any athlete can use to better mentally prepare for their next big moment. Again, that's trainwithperk.com/free guide. It's really going to help. All right, here we go with the top 5 reasons. Reason number 5 is being unable to manage the physical stress that pressure creates. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, obviously, Jay, the inability to manage stress is going to be a problem for people who struggle with pressure. But for many of you, we really only focus on the mental impacts of that stress. In this first of the 5 reasons, I want to talk about the physical stress and the implications that stress has on the athlete's ability to perform before even some of the mental struggle even begins. Because for many athletes, they really struggle with this large amount of stress that happens before the event even starts. And their body turns into as if they were a NASCAR car stuck on the starting line and the gear was in neutral, but their foot was just all the way on the gas and they're burning up so much fuel. For many athletes, this is exactly what happens when they get this incredibly stressed out before a pressure moment. Because if the body is incredibly drained, if your NASCAR is incredibly drained, that's only gonna make it that much harder for you to be able to execute some of the mental things and the mental processes that you're gonna need to be successful as an athlete. Think of it as if you were taking a test, but you slept terribly the night before. Your body's tired, your body's drained, you might even be hungry, and that's probably not going to put you in a great position to perform well on that test. The same works in our sport. If we drain our body, our mind is going to be impacted. We know that the body is intricately connected to the mind, and so any change here, especially if we're tired or we feel drained, is going to have a similar impact on our mind. Now, if this is something that you struggle with, you need to be able to install some sort of relaxation technique. The most common, of course, is breathing, but there are others that you can look into using. I'm gonna have some great content going into these exercises more in detail later on in this series. But if you wanna get started right away, I absolutely recommend looking into some diaphragmatic breathing techniques, some deep breathing techniques, and really working on these, maybe even in practice before the next big pressure moment to kind of help teach your body how to use these tools and how to create the impact that you're looking for. All right, reason number 4 is athletes trying to exert conscious control over some sort of movement that should be automatic. When athletes start to feel pressure, whether it's anxiety or fear or some other emotion, we're going to talk about those here in a bit in this video. A tendency for athletes is that when they experience that anxiety or that fear, it causes them to try and over-control physical movements that they've repped out thousands of times and that by now should be fairly automatic. For example, a basketball player who has to step up and hit a free throw in a big moment where there's some pressure. Well, to this point in their career, they've probably attempted thousands of free throws and they've probably executed their shooting motion hundreds of thousands of times. Yet when they feel pressure, and you can see this happen to people that you watch, playing basketball on TV, when they feel pressure, all of a sudden we notice that their shooting motion, that their free throw attempt, that the movement just looks clunky, that it's absence of any smoothness. I think smoothness is a word. It's absence of any smoothness at all. This, of course, doesn't create a great result, but this happens because the athlete, in the face of that anxiety or fear or whatever other emotion, is trying to over-control, over-analyze, or just generally overthink executing something that they've done so many times before. And what we know from research in neuroscience is that when we do this, when we get so mentally stuck on a movement pattern, it actually creates a situation where it's far more likely that you're going to have an error in that movement pattern. You see the same thing happen with golfers when they're trying to execute their putting stroke on a short putt under pressure. At times you'll start to see it with baseball pitchers who, out of nowhere, all of a sudden they'll start missing the strike zone, generally in the exact same spot. And you'll even see it with tennis players who all of a sudden in the game to win the match, now all of a sudden they can't seem to get their first serve in. These athletes are actually placing too much attention on the movement pattern itself, and it's leading to some costly mistakes in those moments. So if this is you, I need you to become very aware of this and try and catch yourself doing it in the moment. If you're able to catch yourself, a great little tip and strategy that I've used with golfers, with baseball players, with tennis players is to, instead of being so hyper-focused on whatever movement pattern you're trying to execute, focus on your target. Whether that's the spot in the strike zone, whether that's the back of the hole if you're a golfer, whether it's a specific landing zone as a tennis player that you're trying to land your serve. It's far more productive to get your mind focused on that target and to allow your body to flow from there, instead of being so hyper-focused and hypercritical on making some sort of perfect movement, that probably isn't going to happen if we're so fixated on it. But to sum this up, in general, I want you to get your focus downrange. Get your mind, get your attention downrange at the target instead of being so concerned with what's going on with your body. And I think you're gonna find a lot better results. All right, reason number 3 of this top 5 here is being unable to control your attention. So I've said this before in several other videos, but any athlete or performer's ability to be successful on that day is incredibly dependent on how well they're able to control their attention, to control their focus. This requires an understanding of 3 things: where your focus is at any given moment, where it needs to be, and also an understanding of how to get it there. When athletes feel pressure, it's incredibly common for them to have a hard time struggling in one of those 3 areas. And this is something that I spend a ton of time working with my one-on-one clients, in that the phrase that I use with them, and I'll share that with you now, is that we need to be able to place our focus in the right moment, on the right thing, at the right time. However, athletes that struggle with their attention generally struggle in one of these 3 areas. For some athletes, they can't seem to get themselves in the right moment, which of course is the present moment. Our focus can only ever be in one of 3 places: the past, the present, and the future. And of course, for every single athlete, they're going to be way more successful if they can get their mind in the right moment. But for some athletes, they tend to be way too concerned with what's going to happen in the future, what results might happen, or of course the negative consequences of those results. Or if they make a mistake, they tend to get stuck on that mistake and now their mind's in the past. Other athletes may find that their mind's in the right moment, but it's not on the right thing. And instead, their mind tends to be worrying about what other people think. That's the most common one. What their parents think, what their coaches think, what their teammates think of them. And so even though they found a way to get their mind in the present moment, right? So you're in the right moment, but it's not on the right thing. Lastly, is sometimes athletes can get their mind in the right moment and on the right thing, but because of the pressure, they're having a hard time processing what's happening in front of them, and they're having a hard time making quick, timely decisions. So even though they found a way to do a great job to get themselves in the right moment and on the right thing, they're late because they can't process things quick enough. Now, if this is you, I would highly recommend you start looking into some mindfulness-based training. These exercises are great, or this training is great, because it allows you in any given moment to really start to work on where is my mind and can I work to redirect it on whatever task I've given myself. Fortunately for you, I've got a video right there for you. All right, reason number 2 is that you may have an unproductive relationship with the emotions that you feel. If there's one thing I probably spend the most time with my clients on immediately, it's how to help them handle the emotions of sport. Fact is, sport is emotional, and that's one of the reasons that we love it as fans and as parents and even as coaches. But it's also an incredibly emotional experience for the athletes that are immersed in those moments. It isn't easy for any athlete, much less a younger, developing athlete, to enter a situation that's full of stress and full of emotion and understand how to deal with it. Go ahead and add on a layer of stress, and now you've got a situation that can create a pretty rough experience for that athlete. I already mentioned how athletes who are experiencing fear or anxiety can tend to over-control these movement patterns. Well, that's just one of the actions that we see athletes take when they're experiencing this emotion, and we call any of those actions emotionally driven. This simply refers to any action that an athlete takes because of how they feel. And anytime that an athlete takes an action that's based out of fear or worry or doubt or discouragement, almost always those actions don't lead to the athlete placing themselves in a position to have success. Athletes and performers alike need to be able to develop the ability to be able to take productive actions, both mentally and physically, in spite of how they feel. And I'll be honest, that takes some work. I actually think this concept is going to come up many times throughout this series, and that's important because this is going to be so central for any athlete, including you or one of your athletes, so central in their ability to be able to perform under pressure. All right, reason number 1 here on the top 5 reasons as far as why people choke. Reason number one is that their relationship with pressure is that it's threatening. Pressure situations threaten them. Now, this is a concept that we're going to deep dive actually in the next video of this series, but I was asked recently on a podcast, and the host asked an interesting question. He goes, how do you train athletes to not feel pressure? How do you train them to get rid of it? My response surprised him a little bit in that I said, I don't train athletes to get rid of pressure because honestly, you don't need to. Athletes at the highest level feel pressure. They absolutely feel the experience of pressure. And we admire these individuals because we see them in the face of incredible pressure perform at their peak. They're able to achieve peak performance in the face of all this pressure. And we watch them and admire them, but we really ask ourselves, how do they do that? Well, the short answer is that they've been able to create a fundamentally different relationship with pressure than most people. And that is exactly what we're going to deep dive in the second video next week of this series. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another video of this series. And if you haven't already, make sure that you get over to my website, trainwithperk.com/free guide. It's a 10-minute read, 3 easy to install steps, and you are going to be much better prepared for your next big moment. I'll see you next week.